folks, since you love the story of the Den so much, I'm going to do yet another Aberdeen lost river, because this one's not really lost either, because here it is behind me. This is the West Burn, or Gilcomston Burn as it's known when it moves the other side of Maberley Place. So, today's story of Aberdeen's lost rivers begins not quite here. It actually probably begins somewhere up in Maastricht, but this is the story of the West Burn. Here's one of our earliest maps that exist of Aberdeen from 1661, and you can see very clearly that there is a ford. I reckon it's the Broad Ford, which gave the name to our Richard's factory, of course, and that is it, flowing in and joining up with the Denburn sluice and going into the old Loch of Aberdeen, which was bounded by Woodhill and Loch Street. And here is the West Burn at its most visible in Westburn Park, of course, running through a series of ornamental ponds. And this was just taken a couple of days ago, and you can see it's in pretty good health and flowing out of a storm drain. And this tunnel will take you underneath Argyll Place and flow through the hospital grounds up to Woodhill House. Of course, the modern Woodhill House, but we have a map image showing it flowing past the original Woodhill House and up to the old Woodhill home farm. Here we go. So you can see there it is in the ornamental ponds, and you can walk along the sides there, and there's another little ornamental bridge. Everything was quite tidy, but as you can see, some of those cassies and this path either side really needs to be fixed. But what, of course, Westburn Estate is known for is the Chalmers family, because Provost Chalmers, the same man who actually helped found the original Aberdeen Infirmary at Woodhill, William Chalmers, he was the first proprietor of the estate, born in 1695 and died in 1770. And his grandson James was the man who founded Aberdeen Journal. He started out as an apprentice printer in 1728, working for James Nicol, who was the then civic printer. He took over from Nicol in 1736, and his print shop was in Castlegate, basically where Peacock Visual Arts shop The Worm is today. Now, this James was very much a Tory, but he was anti-Jacobite and joined up with Cumberland's army to escape the Jacobites as they came to Aberdeen in 1745. The newspaper itself was begun on the 29th of December 1747, the year following Culloden. James was succeeded by his son James Jr., who was born in 1741. That's 6 years before the newspaper was founded. He actually trained in London as a printer, but then came back and took over as editor of the Aberdeen Journal in 1764. And he famously hosted a meeting between Bishop John Skinner, that's Episcopal Bishop of Aberdeen, and Robert Burns. Now, Burns was an absolute fanboy of John Skinner's dad, John Skinner Senior, the Episcopal minister, who wrote the poem Tullach Gorum. Burns described that as the best Scotch song that I ever saw, and sadly, he was not able to meet Skinner Senior that day. David Chalmers would end up taking over from his father in 1810, and he's the one who commissioned Archibald Simpson to design Westburn House. And here is a picture of what the original house looked like. Sadly, David passed away in 1896, and the house was then sold to the council in 1900. So there is the last big drain, and what's interesting about it, it's not just a drain, it actually has a sluice gate inside, which you can see in 1, 2, 3, there we are. Sluice gate. And so if there's flooding in the park, they can obviously open that and it flushes down through the drains. And then it goes off underneath the rest of the park into Cornhill Hospital grounds. But originally, at the old entrance to Cornhill, you had a hydropathic institution, the Loch Head Hydropathic. And we now jump into Cornhill grounds up to Barkmill Road. So, there's the Barkmill Road sign there. But the most important thing about the Barkmill is it was beside it in 1351 that Provost William Leith had a duel with Baillie Catanach. Now, duels have always been illegal because one person is very likely to end up unalived at the end of it. And that is what happened, that Baillie Catanach ended up dead. And Provost Leith is quite contrite that honour had been satisfied, but he'd ended up with a dead councillor. So he put up a plaque in memory of Baillie Catanach, and he then donated 2 brand new bells to the Mother Church, to St Nicholas Kirk. And those are the bells St Lawrence and St Mary, and those are the ones that in the big fire in the East Kirk in 1874 crashed out of the belfry down to the ground and cracked. And it said that the replacement bells were made from fragments of the old Al Lowry and Al Mary as they were known. So that's the bark. So you might be wondering, what's a bark mill? Well, it's kind of self-evident when you think, what do you get from tree bark? Tannin. And tannin is what tanners used to dye animal hides, leather, of course. So it was a part of the leather dyeing process, and bark would get turned into charcoal, and that would get the tannins to leach out of it, and they could collect the tannin sludge out of it and be able to use that. And again, there's another little link to the tanning process with Mackay Place, where we were not very long ago. Mackay Place was owned by Robert Mackay, who was a skinner, and he had tan pots at his house in Garden Nook, which of course will link us back to the story of the Spa Well and George Jimison. So that's what a bark mill's for. We're now in Wilman Hill, and there's the railway on its way down to the Denburn Valley. And you can see that's it, just gone under Maberley Place there. And here is probably the last sight you'll get above ground of the Gilcomston burn before it dashes underground. I have a quote from John Mill's 1911 book about Aberdeen here. Near the end of John Street, where the outlet of the loch formerly was, the burn passes under the railway and enters on Gilcomston steps at a passageway between 2 houses, numbers 17 and 18. The burn still passes this way near a lamp in the middle of the road and runs along the west side of Spa Street. Again from Milne, for a time it, i.e. the burn, was employed to feed a pond at Broadford Works for condensing steam, but having become polluted with sewage it was given up, and the water from the Denburn took its place. So where I'm standing now, outside the Wilman Hill flats with some new art, street art behind me, is probably just about where there used to be a little footbridge which crossed the Gilcomston or Westburn before the railway came, and of course that was the railway behind me there. And the flats stood on the site of some small cottages which were known as the Rotten Holes. Obviously that's what they were nicknamed, but what they were, houses that they looked more like dormitories where the young apprentices that worked at Broadford's Mill just down the road there actually lived. Most of them would probably have been orphans and had been grateful to get a job from the Broadford's Works. And I always say on tours that it's actually no great surprise that student halls were built on the site of Rotten Holes. I've been a student myself, I'm allowed to say this. Now, I have to credit the owner of this image. Their username is Shea Logan, and they posted it on the 28 Days Later Urban Exploring Forum. This image shows the Gilcomston Burn Inlet right below where I stood on the video about the Denburn. This is what's under that tunnel. It's where the two rivers join. So technically you could call this the outflow of the Gilcomston burn. It joins the Den burn, which then flows out onto Trinity Quay. So let's go back to the very beginning and I'll show you exactly where the source is. And the source, according to John Milne's 1911 book. This burn, sometimes called Gilcomston Burn, rises at Maastricht and flows east across the road to Cairncry Quarries. And the site of Cairncry Quarries is Northfield Academy, not very far from the site of the Powys Burn, where we were earlier on this year. So there we have it. The west burn of Gilcomston rises in Maastricht just above the site of the Cairncry Quarries, and its outflow is where it joins the Den burn around Mackay Place, Jack's Brae. Another Lost River of Aberdeen coming very soon.